Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Ramo, Hare
Krishna devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Welcome devotees to morning Bhagavatam class. This morning we will be discussing and hearing from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 10, verse 5. And the chapter is entitled The Departure of Lord Krishna to Dwarka. And the class will be given by His Grace Dronacarya Prabhu from ISKCON, Philadelphia. Hare Krishna Prabhu. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Gurudev and Srila Prabhupada.
Please accept my humble obeisances. Jai Gurudev, Jai Srila Prabhupada.
It's all yours.
It's great to be with you, Harrisburg family, on this Monday morning. I'll start off by chanting Jai Radha Madhava.
Yes.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Prabhupada 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 Gurudev 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 Jaya Gurudev Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Ashotatara Shishimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Ashotatara Shishimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur Maharaj Ki Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrindi Ki ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Prem Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Ki Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radha Kun Giri Govardhan Ki Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Gangamai Yamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Tulsi Devi Ki Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Transcendental Book Distribution Ki Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bo. All glories the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories, the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Tirtha Swami Iti Namani Namaste Krishna Padaya Prabhupada Ashratadmani Sri Gaura Karuna Shakti Bhakti Tirtha Iti Namani Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayit Nasta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtuki. Before reciting Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should first offer one's respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, unto Nara Narayan Rishi, the supermost human beings, unto the goddess of learning, Mother Saraswati, and unto the author, Srila Vyasadeva. Regular attendance in classes on Srimad Bhagavatam, and rendering service to the pure devotee. All that is troublesome to the heart becomes almost completely destroyed, and devotional service unto the Supreme Lord becomes established as an irrevocable fact. We're here on text number 5 of the 10th chapter of the first canto, and this is right after Grandfather Bhishma has departed, and Maharaj Yudhisthira is he's now ruling the kingdom by the will of Lord Krishna. This was his divine plan all along. And we're hearing about some of these activities that are now going on under the prosperous rule of Maharaj Yudhisthira. Nadya Samudra Giriya Sanaspati Virud Aha Falantya Oshadaya Sarva Kamam Anritutashavai. The synonyms: Nadya, rivers; Samudra, oceans; Giraya, hills and mountains; Savan Aspati, vegetables; Virudha, creepers; Phalanti, active; Osadaya, drugs; Sarvaha, all; Kamam, necessities; Anritu, seasonal; Tasya, for the king; Vai, certainly. Translation: the rivers, oceans, hills, mountains, forests, creepers, and active drugs in every season paid their tax quota to the king in profusion. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Since Maharaj Yudhisthira was under the protection of the Ajita, the infallible Lord, as above mentioned, the properties of the Lord, namely the rivers, oceans, hills, forests, etc., were all pleased, and they used to supply the respective quota of taxes to the king. The secret to success is to take refuge under the protection of the Supreme Lord. Without his sanction, nothing can be possible. To make economic development by our own endeavors on the strength of tools and machinery is not all. The sanction of the Supreme Lord must be there. Otherwise, despite all instrumental arrangements, everything will be unsuccessful. The ultimate cause of success is the Daiva, the Supreme. Kings like Maharaj Yudhisthira knew perfectly well that the king is the agent of the Supreme Lord to look after the welfare of the mass of people. Actually, the state belongs to the Supreme Lord. The rivers, oceans, forests, hills, drugs, etc., are not creations of man. They are all creations of the Supreme Lord. The living being is allowed to make use of the property of the Lord for the service of the Lord. Today's slogan is that everything is for the people, and therefore the government is for the people and by the people. but to produce a new species of humanity at the present moment on the basis of God consciousness and perfection of human life, the ideology of godly communism. The world has to again follow the footsteps of kings like Maharaj Yudhisthira or Parikshit. There is enough of everything by the will of the Lord, and we can make proper use of things to live comfortably without enmity between man and man, or man and animal, or man and nature. The control of the Lord is everywhere, and if the Lord is pleased, every part of nature will be pleased. The river will flow profusely to fertilize the land. The oceans will supply sufficient quantities of minerals, pearls, and jewels, and the forest will supply sufficient wood, drugs, and vegetables. And the seasonal changes will effectively help produce fruits and flowers in profuse quantity. The artificial way of living, depending on factories and tools, can render so-called happiness only to a limited number at the cost of millions. Since the energy of the mass of people is engaged in factory production, the natural products are being hampered. And for this, the mass is unhappy. Without being educated properly, the mass of people are following in the footsteps of the vested interest by exploiting natural reserves. And therefore, there is acute competition between individual and individual, nation and nation. There is no control by the trained agent of the Lord. We must look into the defects of modern civilization by comparison here, and should follow in the footsteps of Maharaj Yudhisthira to cleanse man and wipe out anachronisms. Om Agyanata Barandasha Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Umilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Swapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Translation once again. The rivers, oceans, hills, mountains, forests, the creepers, and active drugs in every season paid their tax quota to the king in profusion. Srila Prabhupada gives such an incredible explanation of this in the purport. And just goes back to just mentioning gratitude to Srila Prabhupada for really explaining this verse in particular, and all the other Bhaktivedanta purports that he's given us. A seemingly very simple sentence that is mentioned here is being spoken by Sukadeva Goswami. But it has such strong implications as we're living in modern times, where our connection with nature has been become in a place of unbalance, where the rivers, oceans, hills, mountains, forests, creepers, and active drugs, they're being exploited. They're not being used in the way that they were ever intended to be used. And as a result, we see so much calamities that occur within nature and then naturally in society as well. Srila Prabhupada in this purport, when he starts off by talking about the secret to success is to take refuge under the protection of the Supreme Lord. The king, the king has a very elevated as well as important, extremely important role in activating this consciousness within society, that one should take refuge under the protection of the Supreme Lord. In the fourth chapter, beginning of the fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Evam parampara praptim imam rajasyo vidu sakalena mahata yoga nasta parantapa. Krishna explains that the supreme science was received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in this way. And of course, that chain of knowledge was broken. Krishna appeared to impart that to Arjuna. Again, Arjuna was a Kshatriya. He was in the line of saintly kings. Why? Because these saintly kings, these Raja Rishis, they were not just ordinary rulers that were looking out for their own fame and power, but they understood that the natural societal order that was put into place by Lord Krishna, and in any level of order, there has to be some type of leadership, some type of supervision and guidance that is given. And that has to be done from the platform of Krishna consciousness in order to make things work in peace and harmony. What is that peace and harmony that is outlined? That was also outlined by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 3. It is the process of sacrifice. It is the understanding that we ourselves are not the doers, that there is a connection between our endeavor, the results of that endeavor, and also what we receive through that endeavor. And this is a very important point for everyone to understand, and that is that there are three primary causes of action. There is the jiva, or the spirit soul, and in this material world, we're conditioned souls because we're under the influence of the false ego. But it has a desire, and that through that desire, that is basically the limitation of what the jiva, the spirit soul activity is. It has a desire to want to achieve something, to do something. That desire then has to be sanctioned by Ishvara, or the supreme controller, the supreme Lord Krishna. And then what actually carries it out, that is material nature, or prakriti. And without understanding this triangle of how they're interconnected, one will be lost. And Srila Prabhupada mentions this in the purport, that simply by coming up with technology, studying it, implementing it, it is not the all in all. In fact, one will become successful unless it is actually sanctioned by the Supreme Lord. But what is actually carrying it out? These are not man-made. These are not man-made things, right? We're taking earth, water, fire, air, ether. We're utilizing the resources of the rivers, oceans, hills, forests, in order to produce equipment, machinery, in order to try to make lives more convenient. So there's this connection. Without the sanction of the Supreme Lord, nothing can take place. Without the interaction between the modes of material nature, prakriti, nothing will happen. Prakriti is not under the control of the jiva, the spirit soul. It's under the control of Ishvara, Krishna. So ultimately, the top of that triangle there, all connection goes back to Krishna. So this process of sacrifice was outlined by Krishna in the 3rd chapter. And this is, in the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy with this sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happy and achieving liberation. The demigods, being pleased by sacrifices, will also please you, and thus by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being pleased, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, sacrifice, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief." So we also know that the demigods are under the control of the Supreme Lord. And that is also a very important concept to understand, that the demigods are simply acting as agents of Krishna and supplying all the necessities of life. Krishna also tells us in the Bhagavad Gita that really the power of the demigods, the source of the demigods, is him, and therefore all the creations of the demigods are really being bestowed by Krishna, but he's simply delegating that out. So understanding this, there's a way that Krishna has designed us to live in harmony with nature. He says, man and man, man and animal, and man in nature. We actually find that the animals, they naturally adhere to this relationship with nature. In fact, when you try to take an animal out of nature, you see that it reacts differently. But there's a certain level of order that animals have with nature. Because the blessing and the curse of the human life is that it has an advanced level of consciousness, that it has the ability to inquire about the absolute. But with that level of inquiry also comes a certain level of intelligence that, if misused, can actually degrade one back to the animal life. Krishna says these are actually the most unfortunate people, because one who has achieved the human form of life, and have the ability to inquire about the absolute truth, the purpose of life, to actually reconnect with Krishna and get out of this cycle of repeated birth and death that is here in the material world. If there's a misuse of it, then that is, Krishna says, is the most unfortunate situation. In fact, in the beginning of the purport to this section of sacrifice that I mentioned, Srila Prabhupada starts off by saying that the material creation by the Lord is a chance offered to the conditioned souls to come back home, back to Godhead. All living entities within the material creation are conditioned by material nature because of their forgetfulness of their relationship with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these practices that are given by Krishna are only for our benefit. And if we follow them, if we follow the path outlined by Krishna, then naturally there will be order in life. Why? Because Krishna will be pleased. And if Krishna is pleased, all these other elements that are under Krishna's control, they will naturally supply all the necessities that are required. Krishna talks about the another part in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says that I am the ritual, I am the sacrifice, I am the offering to the ancestors, I am the healing herb and the transcendental chant. I am the butter and the fire and the offering. And that he withholds and sends forth the rain. He supplies heat. All these necessities, Krishna's again claiming in the Bhagavad Gita that you can trace them all back to him. But they are not meant simply for our own enjoyment. And that is one of our main problems as conditioned souls. And we see this prevalent all throughout society, not just here in America, which we definitely see it, but all throughout the world, and the problems and troubles that we see throughout the world. That we don't fully grasp and understand, appreciate, and offer gratitude to the concept that all these things are being sent forth by Krishna. And by utilizing them in Krishna's service, in the service of God, we can actually purify our lives in this life and go back home, back to Godhead at the end of our lives. For the utilization of our own sense gratification, we will become more and more degraded. Our consciousness will become more and more polluted, meaning that we'll forget more and more about our relationship with God. And things will be in disorder. So that's really the concept that is being put forth here. Now, how is this applied? We see that in life, when we look around, it's almost hard to even grasp such a time or life when everything is living in harmony. Because what we have is we have a very forced situation in life. By the will of man, and Krishna has facilitated this because nothing can happen without the facilitation of Krishna. So Krishna facilitates or allows or gives sanction to a lot of activity, which is not always in our best interest. But he sanctions it here in this realm of the material world, which everything is temporary. So no matter what happens, it's only a temporary situation. Man can screw it up, but Krishna has given some sanction, for this. Now we can follow Krishna's order, or we can follow the dictation of the speculation of mankind. And that's really the realm that we're in right now, is we're following the path forward that has been set by material scientists, businessmen, leaders that are not in tune with this idea that Maharaj Yudhisthira, Maharaj Parikshit was, that the leader of society is actually supposed to be looking out for all the necessities of society, not for their own benefit, not for their own fame, glory, and wealth, but all these are actually supposed to be offered to society, and society is supposed to be taught that the source of all these is Krishna, and we should give back to that. But that is not happening. And we can trace back to different civilizations that have existed. And you find similar tendencies and trends that are there in the modern world. As I was mentioning, that it's almost unthinkable to especially for myself living in a city, everything is just very forced. You know, we've created big buildings, we've created infrastructure, we've created ways to communicate, that we become very dependent on factory production. And as a result, what are we doing? Where, you know, everybody's congregated or pushed into small areas of living. We are overburdened by pollution, you know, noise pollution, light pollution. I mean, it was so bad. I mean, even for me, like I used to go to Gita Nagari once a year. Me and my family would go for Rath Yatra every year, and we go the week before. And I used to like to help set up for the Rath Yatra, and it was a little bit of a vacation for us. And I would go, and I would be literally, for the first 3 days, I would be in withdrawal. And like I would sometimes, I would even, I couldn't sleep because it was too quiet. You know, it was like I needed some type of like noise outside that was going on, because I become so accustomed to it. And you'd walk around in nature, and you just think, I was thinking like, okay, there's nothing to do. What's going on in the world? Like, there's nothing happening here, because the mind becomes so conditioned to thinking that, you know, there's really nothing to be understood in nature, that everything is happening. All the things that are important that are happening in this creation of a busy life that we've imposed upon ourselves. And then over time, by like day 3 or day 4, it got to the point where it was like, this is the way people should live. You know, this is the way, you know, things started settling down, started becoming, you know, engaged and you know, adapting, you know, to a more natural order. And by the end of the week, I was like, I don't want to go back. It started to you know, settle in that this is actually a very natural way for us to live, and a very comfortable way of living, as opposed to the opposite of what you would think coming from a city. Srila Prabhupada, in his 7 purposes of ISKCON, he states that, you know, this is one of the purposes, that he wants us to restore this concept of simple living and high thinking. The standard of living that we have right now is based on sense gratification. We're overtaken by the modes of passion and ignorance. How to create more wealth, and that wealth is only for a few. It's not for the many, and therefore, Srila Prabhupada mentions this. You know, it benefits a few, and the rest of society more or less suffers. We look at our food production, right? Food is being produced in massive quantities, but it's being produced in factories, you know, and they have to add so many artificial components to it in order for it to last. They can box it up or put it in packaging, and they make it look very pretty so that we want to eat it. But if you ever read the ingredients, you know, 85 ingredients just to have a granola bar. You know, what to speak of all these other foods that we eat. A lot of foods that we eat are almost like plastics. They've been processed so many times. The vitamins and natural minerals are stripped out of them, and therefore they have to fortify them with all different types of vitamins and that they put in. So we have to understand and take a look back on this. And when Srila Prabhupada says at the end, we must look into the defects of modern civilization by comparison here. You know, and there are people that are profiting greatly from this. We look at the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry, again, is a factory production of mass amounts of medication. And that is meant to offset a lifestyle that is very unnatural. So first, the unnatural lifestyle is created, where we're running around every day trying to serve our job, our boss, traveling sometimes up to 1.5 hours a day just to get there. We have to provide such expenses for transportation, commuting, and then we get there. Most of the times we're unhappy with the type of work that we do, and then we come back home. Most of our time in our day is taken up. We bring back that energy back into our family life. We then use that money that we've created in order to pay for the house, cars that we need, oftentimes can't afford. So we're now living a lifestyle oftentimes we can't even afford. So therefore we become indebted and we're living on credit more or less. And then we're supplying this chain of factory production, which then is producing foodstuffs that are unnatural for us. So naturally, we're living a stressful life, a life that is not fulfilling. We're putting food into our body that isn't necessarily the most nutritious for us. And then naturally, this brings about disorders, not order, but disorders. And then you have to treat that. So what do? You develop all these different types of medications in order to treat the conditions that were created by an unnatural life. So this is the world that we live in. So you have, especially here in America, huge amounts, highest numbers ever of depression, levels of physical ailments, diabetes, heart disease, high cholesterol, cancers, despite so many advances in cancer research. We haven't been able to stop it. We haven't been able to offset it. All this is used to exposure to unnatural elements, exposure to unnatural foods that we shouldn't be eating, especially meat production. I remember several months ago, we spoke about meat production and how it used to be at a time when meat was almost like a very rare thing for people to eat. And they would have these little butcher shops, and they would be for like the people that they wouldn't be in town. They'd be on the outskirts of town. And they'd just have these little ones here and there. But it was only farmers that would do it, and they'd have their own little customers. But then with the onset of refrigeration, they realized that actually we can do this in large quantities. And now meat became like an every meal option for people. And then factory farming started, taking place. And really just threw off the complete, the complete balance within society. Ultimately, everything comes back to this level of consciousness. This level of consciousness in the times that we were looking at was led and instituted by the kings. These kings were Raja Rishis. They weren't just ordinary kings. Again, they were saintly. They understood the value of life, the purpose of life. And they ruled in that way. Now, we don't have such a situation. That's why I said it's almost unthinkable to live in a way that is being outlined here. The process of sacrifice that is given to us. First and foremost begins with the Sankirtan movement, the congregational chanting of the holy names. Through the congregational chanting of the holy name, we can make a difference. The more we go into society, and we're able to explain to others and show others through our actions the books and teachings that are being spoken by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, by bringing joy into the atmosphere, by bringing Krishna's presence into the atmosphere, because Krishna is not different than his name, by going into public and chanting. The continuation of this activity all throughout the globe, in every town and every village, and this is our mission. We can begin to make a difference in changing the hearts of others. I remember back at the 50th anniversary of ISKCON, we were talking about different accomplishments that have come forth since Srila Prabhupada came to the West, and one of them was vegetarianism. I forget the devotee, but when the devotee did, he was researching almost all the vegetarian movements that have sparked and become very prominent today. The leadership of that, they all kind of trace back to having some connection with prasadam, and as well as just the idea of being vegetarian, which is very little at the time. Srila Prabhupada really brought that emphasis with him to the West. But there's so much work that needs to be done in changing the consciousness of society, and that is incumbent upon us. We have to resist this urge to live in a very unnatural way. And even those that are in the city, we have jobs that we kind of sometimes fall into those categories. We have to be like that person who's unaffected by it. We have to be like that lotus leaf that becomes untouched by water. We have to find our source of energy, our source of substance on the teachings of Krishna consciousness. Where society is becoming more and more depressed, becoming more and more unnatural, we have to become more and more energized, more and more enthusiastic, in seeing that there is a need of society right now and that we have an answer for it. We have to really work hard in order to try to bring society to these answers. Little by little, person by person, community by community, congregation by congregation, we have to start emphasizing ways in which our consciousness can be changed to the point where we understand Krishna is in the center of everything. It is not my material desires that need to be fulfilled. If we work for Krishna's pleasure, offering the fruits of our work to Krishna, and then distributing those fruits for the benefit of our fellow man and woman, we can make a difference and begin to change society, begin to create the society that we live in into a place of simple living and high thinking. So anyway, it'll be interesting to hear some of the thoughts of the devotees on this idea that's being put forth here by Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Dronacarya. Such a wonderful class, and yes, it's amazing how Srila Prabhupada's so simple, so direct, yet so easy to understand, and everything is there. It's really, really, really nice. Would like to ask devotees if you have any questions, any comments, any takeaways, any clarification that you need. Please do raise your hand so that we can call upon you to ask your question. I I have a question that if you could shed some light on Dronacarya, and it's really interesting how Sri Prabhupada in the purport on the third line, how he literally put the secret to success, and then he puts it in italics, you know, which means it's the first and the foremost, right? And I remember when you were speaking in your class, you talked about ritualistic activities and demigod worships and stuff like that. And sometimes in today's times, we see that devotees struggle with that, even though they know that the secret to success is to take full refuge of the Supreme Lord. But at the same time, I don't know if it's, and that's what I want to ask you, if you could shed some light. I don't know if it's because one is not completely convinced that the ultimate refuge is the Lord, and that's why someone continues to perform ritualistic demigod activities, or is it an attachment issue? Like, how can we make that switch? If my question is clear.
It comes with knowledge, I think. That we have to, depending on our upbringing and our initial exposure to spiritual life, we can get indoctrinated into certain rituals. Me, myself, I grew up as a Christian, so I didn't have that same exposure that some of my fellow devotees that grew up as Hindus did, where they would fast on a certain day and do this and do that and that was all kind of like a very foreign concept to me. So if this is what we're taught from the very beginning, there may be a sense in the back of our minds that, okay, I philosophically, I understand that Krishna is the Supreme Lord, but there's these demigods. I just don't want them to get upset at me. I don't want them to be mad at me. I don't want them, if I forget to do this fast on a Tuesday, or if I don't include, the name of the demigod along with my chanting of Krishna's names. If I don't they may get upset with me, and therefore something bad may happen to me. This eventually has to get overcome. One, because we're afraid of something bad happening to us. So therefore we're taking refuge with the expectation that something bad won't happen to me. We understand that Krishna is the source of the demigods, and that by supplying water to the root of all existence, Krishna, everything else becomes naturally satisfied. In other words, if Krishna becomes satisfied, everything else will fall into its natural order. But when we become self-absorbed and we start thinking, well, okay, if I don't do this, then something bad may happen to me. I'll tell the story. There's a devotee in Philadelphia, right? And he was living at the temple, an older gentleman, and he came to live in the temple, and does this very nice service. Very, very nice man, but he's very attached to certain levels of rituals, and he just can't break them. And it's almost become an obstacle for him in surrendering to Krishna. So initially, those rituals probably helped strengthen his sense of commitment to pursuing God. But at a certain point, those rituals almost become like a barrier to him, even to the point where, so now he's thinking, like, if I don't do this, God will punish me. If I don't do this, God will punish me. If I don't do this, God will punish me. And we're thinking, no, you're doing devotional service. God's not going to punish you. But it becomes so ingrained in the mind that if I don't do this at this particular time, this particular way, God will punish you. And some of it is with regards to demigods. Other is with regards to Krishna. And then the more we learn about Krishna, is that Krishna is the well-wisher. He's the friend of all living entities. Krishna is not here to punish us. Now, if we abandon Krishna service to go out and do something irresponsible, then there's going to be some reaction for that. And that reaction is only going to be Krishna's loving hand in order to us, we may see it as a level of punishment, but it's really Krishna's hand to kind of guide us in the right way. But this level of ritual for the sake of our own benefit, it has to be eventually abandoned, and that is an obstacle. That is, praying for our own welfare, praying for that all our desires will be fulfilled. Eventually this has to become transformed into pure love of God, which is, Krishna, I exist to serve you. I want what is best for you. I understand that you know what is best for me. So I'm going to leave that up to you to determine. Krishna knows these things. Now, when we get to a deeper relationship with Krishna, when we get into a deeper personal relationship, we can have those conversations with the Lord. I'm struggling with this, Krishna. This thing is really on my mind. I know you know it. You're the super soul within the heart. I know you know it, but I feel I need to describe it in order to get it out of me. Now you do what you wish to do. And then you leave it in Krishna's hands. So what do we know? We know that if we really, Krishna tells us how we can actually attain real peace. Bhoktaram yagyatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram sarvadam sarvabhutanam suradam sarvabhutanam gyatva mam shantam richati. How do we achieve this shanti, this peace? We have to have our consciousness. Krishna says we have to have full consciousness of Krishna. Then we also have to understand that he's the ultimate beneficiary, of all sacrifices, that he's the supreme Lord of all the demigods and the planets, and that he is the true benefactor of all living entities. He's the well-wisher, as I mentioned, friend of all living entities. And when we understand that is Krishna, then we can actually achieve true peace. Otherwise, we're just wondering, okay, something bad going to happen to me. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. I left the house with my, left foot instead of my right foot. And I may get into a car accident today. Or, Krishna, we get so, our minds take us into different places that we depend on Krishna. We depend on Krishna for everything. That is Krishna consciousness.
Very nice point. I'm sorry, Dronacarya, that you mentioned, and what you shared, what you just spoke. What's coming to my mind is, one, and I really like the example that he gave about this devotee, that one gets so ritualistically attached to the demigod worship that it actually blocks our connection. I think he used the word barrier. It was a very nice word. He creates a barrier with, for us to develop a relationship with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of God. That was a very nice, thought that really, that struck me. And another point that you mentioned is as you're speaking about, the ritualistic demigod worshiping and not realizing that the Supreme Lord is the ultimate refuge, is that, it's a fear factor. If I don't do this, I'm going to get slapped, I'm going to get kicked at right foot. It's a fear factor, but you also said that the Supreme Lord is the loving spiritual, God, right? Whereas when we think about demigod worshiping, is like, it's a fear thing, as opposed to the Supreme Lord, that is not a fear thing. So I really liked how you really address that, and how we have to overcome that, because we, thank you so much for adding light on that. Dear Krishna, please go ahead, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for wonderful class as always. Very nice points.
Sure.
So when Mataji asked last question, one realization I was thinking is, okay, naturally, sometimes devotees are afraid of the reactions from demigods due to their past practices and all that. So I was just wondering if we could have the similar kind of fear, with committing Vaishnava aparadh and things like that. Probably that will help even more in our spiritual life. So just a thought that came to me. So thank you for making me realize that through your answer. I don't know how that thought came, but and second is one question I have is when we read these glories of the Vedic kings in Srimad Bhagavatam, especially Canto 1, we realize Srila Prabhupada is giving kind of peace formula in this world. How the only possibility of peace in this world would be following the footsteps of kings like Maharaj Yudhishthir, Maharaj Parikshit, Maharaj Janak, who have been Krishna conscious kings. At the same time, we know this is not a possibility in Kali Yuga. It's a remote possibility. That's the nature of this age. So I'm trying to understand, or probably if you can shed some more light on, as a member of Krishna conscious society, as a member of ISKCON, as a member of a spiritual society, what can we do to create that kind of environment, at least within the society? Like you mentioned about Sankirtan, that is absolutely the one thing we need, and probably the only thing we need. But at the same time, at least I'm not a pure devotee as of now. So my whatever chanting or whatever I'm trying to do is not so pure. So I'm just trying to get a few more points from your experience, Prabhu. Sorry for the long question, but
That's very, very nice. I liked your realization, especially about the Vaishnava aparadh. And that's something really that we are to be fearful of. Krishna protects his devotees, but when we, make offenses, are disrespectful to other devotees, Krishna takes that very seriously. And that even includes the demigods. So, even though we're not to become attached to the ritualistic worship of the demigods, we're still to have a level of respect, knowing that the demigods are devotees of the Lord. And if we approach the demigods through service of the Lord, those that were kind of born in that system and they have a relationship with certain demigods, that love or that worship of them can actually be transformed into worship of Krishna by instead of asking them for certain things, you can please bless me that I can become a better servant of Krishna, and therefore that relationship can be transformed. And specifically with Vaishnava aparadh, that is definitely I very much liked your realization about that. With regards to ISKCON and how we can bring about this peace formula, is there has to be a level of commitment to the principles, a sincere commitment to the principles that Srila Prabhupada laid out in his 7 purposes. These were very well thought out. And this is the way his vision of a Krishna conscious society would unfold. And it can really be broken into 2 categories. One is being able to deliver a Krishna conscious message, a spiritual message, to bring people to a spiritual consciousness out in society. It doesn't necessarily talk about making it in every case about just a Krishna conscious, or he talks about, spiritual principles, and educate society at large, on principles of spirituality. So but really getting that message out. So that's the first part of it, through the performing of Sankirtan, performing book distribution, many ways, prasadam distribution, connecting with people in so many different ways that we can, and depending on their level of reception, being able to introduce some level of spirituality into their lives. A full Hare Krishna lifestyle may be too much for certain people in the beginning. So therefore we have to give in ways in which people can actually receive it. The other part is, if we're trying to create and go into society and to teach them, we have to be examples. There has to be an example of a society back at home. So when people come to our centers, our temples, they have to actually illustrate and be a true life example, a model of how to actually become peaceful. So there's two ways that we can work in simplifying, making more focused our lives in serving our temples, going out on Sankirtan, and creating these two environments, both a very healthy temple life and very healthy Sankirtan life. And then we'll actually see that all those activities that we want that to be directed towards ourselves, where we were in the center, now we'll see that Krishna is in the center. When we go to the temple, that is the one really nice thing. It's you understand that actually Krishna is in charge here. We come to our homes, we think, okay, this is my home, this is my car, these possessions belong to me. When we go to the temple, we understand, okay, actually everything here belongs to Krishna, and that's a really important consciousness. So the less we have for ourselves and the more we think is for Krishna, the better we are. And we actually get to receive that reciprocation. We see it. You go out and you do just a regular task like cutting the grass or washing the dishes or the pots or cleaning the floor. No one would really get excited about doing that. For a house, we think, okay, well, that's labor. I got to do my chores. You do that for Krishna, you actually feel a level of ecstasy and bliss. And then going out when we're full of that joy, going out there and sharing it with others. I hope that helps, dear Krishna Prabhu. Did that?
Absolutely, Prabhu. Beautiful answer. Actually, you brought it to the most practical way. Sometimes we get lost in big jargons, but you really nail it down to the basics, to the services. Thank you. It was very helpful. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, dear Krishna. Bhakti Brett, go ahead. Oops.
Hare Krishna, Jana Prabhuji. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to your Guru Maharaj. All glories to Shiva Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
Jonah, I was absorbing the last portion of Prabhupada's purport, in which he says, without being educated properly, the mass of people are following in the footsteps of the vested interests by exploiting natural reserves. There is no control by the trained agent of the Lord. We must look into defects of modern civilization by comparison here. And we should follow in the footsteps of Miraj Yudhisthira to cleanse man and wipe out anachronisms. And I was thinking of the point you brought up, Jonah, when you said, Krishna doesn't always facilitate our best interest. And in that turn, I was just thinking, this as dear Krishna said, this first canto learning about these kings and a sort of government and a leader we want to follow under. And then thinking of this word anachronisms. And in our society, we live in America, it's so progressive. We have so many means to help people, but yet we so choose not to because of, just the generational things ways go. We all live in this factory society. And right now, Jonah, I'm traveling and I'm in Guatemala, and I've noticed, the community here is a lot more spiritually inclined than, the towns I come from in America. There really isn't that issue of homelessness that we'll see in places like Philadelphia. There is our poverty stricken, but there's a presence of, you know, military force. And I don't mean military forces in like a scary way, because that's in America. If we saw military force, we'd think, oh, that's scary. But it's more of like a mood of Kshatriyas. You know, they have blocked off areas of the town with maybe, you know, poor huts made out of, you know, cast iron, but they're protected. It's gated. They're allowed in at night. You know, in America, we see things like Kensington. We see people that come from these, they might come from generational abuse, like we said in this purport, like, oh, my father was a drunkard, so I'm going to become a drunkard, or this person was on drugs. But we don't seem to really want to help them in America or break that. So as you said, dear Krishna, or Jonah, as you know, Krishna doesn't always facilitate our best interest. You know, seeing things like this, seeing that there are parts of the world that do want to take care of people, and then, you know, coming from America, where we see there really isn't, in my opinion, that much care for the downtrodden. You know, how can we understand what our best interest is as devotees? And when it comes to helping, you know, spreading the Sankirtan movement, you know, it's not a question of our interest, but it's a question of, you know, helping our fellow man.
We have to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, because a lot of this can become very confusing. We have to first, under the guidance of a person who understands the truth, that can see through the network of confusion that is this material world, and one who can actually understand how to work through this world but be unattached to it, and then what proper action is, and there's misconceptions about what proper action is, and then what is actually best for ourselves at this particular time. You know, this can really all help be clarified under the guidance of spiritual teacher, and those spiritual, and it's not, it can be numerous, you know, through the association of mature devotees, also through one's Diksha Guru. So there can be Shiksha Gurus, there can be Diksha Guru, there's a Diksha Guru. And then we also have Srila Prabhupada, who is our primary Shiksha Guru, the teachings that we learn about in the Bhagavad Gita. So this, and Srimad Bhagavatam, so this Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, we have to become very in tuned into the messages that are being put forth by them. And then under the guidance of an active guru, really try to understand how I can actually become an agent of change. And sometimes it may be first you just need to change yourself, and then before you want to start changing the world. A lot of times we want to change everything but ourselves. And in that, we oftentimes become frustrated in actually trying to contribute, because we're not doing the things we have to do to actually become satisfied within. And this can all be pointed out and guided in the appropriate way for the particular person, under the guidance of, like I said, mature devotees, who are less affected or unaffected by the confusion, you know, that is there in the material world. But as you know, Srila Prabhupada is telling us that we need to follow in the footsteps of Maharaj Yudhisthira. You know, we are to make a difference. Srila Prabhupada came to America. You know, he set out on that journey, you know, that started on that rooftop with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and days that, you know, that were right after that, when he came to that conviction that actually this is what my life is about. is pleasing my spiritual master by spreading Krishna consciousness. I mean, he came to make a difference, and he's made a huge difference. We are too to follow in the footsteps of Maharaj Yudhisthira, but we have to do it under, proper direction and guidance. Is that okay? Is that okay?
No, Jonah, that was wonderful. But I mean,
is there anything more specific that you were looking for? Or is that
I think it was more so, that realization, like you said, like Srila Prabhupada came to America due to the impersonalism. And for me, it's just, being in a different place, seeing that, to an extent, there are areas of the world where it is more spiritually inclined. There's a church in every corner here. They're all open all the time. People are in there. There are, the poor on the streets, and people are giving alms to them. They're giving food. Even in people's windows, we could just say Krishna. I mean, it's all Catholicism, but there's, pictures of Jesus, and everyone's, giving flowers and giving money. And it's just very, in America, it's more so we can't say that the individual relationship isn't positive or, shining light in a way, but it's more so a community effort, I feel like, in this area. And as we hear from your Guru Maharaj, it is, we need to fixate on our community more and more so, and not just, who we know personally, because we're so quick to be kind to the stranger. So we should continue to be that way. So I just find it, it was very eye-opening. And then hearing your class, it really tied it all together. So, and those anachronisms in our society is just that, we live in this progressive society, and there's all these new confangled, factories and inventions and technology, but really the thing that does belong is just that love of God and spirituality that we all have inside of us. That's the thing that needs to be put back into it. It's all the other things that come with Kali Yuga that are the anachronisms that don't belong.
Very nicely said. And that's it's a blessing to be able to draw inspiration, from the examples that you're given. That when we see a place where there seems to be a pervading feeling of spirituality, we can draw inspiration from that and say, how would I be able to, either I want to live here in order to, this is where I would want to be, or I want to be able to duplicate this in some ways, on a scale that's manageable for me, or bring elements of that back to the community that you're, that you're in right now. So we can learn all over the place. I mean, there's lessons, good lessons, as well as lessons that we can learn from, where we say, okay, this is what you don't want to do. And then we can learn from that. And then we can also learn from a lot of lessons out there in the world where we say, I'm going to take something really wonderful from here.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always that example. There's always more you can do. And it really made me think of like Balabhadra always talking about when he comes to Philadelphia, like visiting Kensington and things like that. And I don't know how that would go, but that was the first thing I thought of. I was like, wow, like, this is such a poor place. These people are downtrodden. In America, we have the same thing, but it seems like no one even cares to even go down and give someone a meal or shake their hand, And not everyone's looking for an immediate fix. We're not saying, immediately throw them into a home and give them a job and put a suit on them and say, okay, get to work in America. But, just to have a friend, I think is the most important thing.
Yeah. And it's a sustained effort. I think, I know my because you mentioned Kensington, my mother and father's church, they have the church itself has some type of mission there, and it's been going on for years. And sometimes we think, okay, we'll just go down there, we'll distribute prasadam and do some sankirtan, which will definitely have some benefit. But when we talk about a lot of these, communities that have just been really downtrodden, overrun with drugs, and to the point where it's like you don't even know if it can be recovered. It's almost like it just almost has to become extinct.
And that ties in with the sentence in Srila Prabhupada's purport, without being properly educated, the mass of people are following in the footsteps of the vested interests. there had to be something in their life that led them to that point. And, you know, in American society, we know drugs have always been pervasive. They've always been there.
Yeah, when they were introduced, why they were introduced, and you know, it was definitely there to control people, and people fell for it. And but it's a sustained effort. Like it has to be it has to be on like a programmatic level in some of these societies in order to make a difference. Like it has to be like, okay, we're going to invest a certain amount of energy and resources and money in setting up a level of rehabilitation. You need people that are educated on how to do that, and it can be done. It just really needs the you know, a level of commitment, you know, from people that want to do it. You know, it's more than simply just, you know, taking a few photos of, you know, distributing a few meals of prasadam to a few hands. You know, again, that's all good. There's nothing bad about that. There's only it's a building block of positivity. But
Absolutely, but there is more to it.
Sustained effort. It's like you have to almost set up and become become one with them, and you know, through year after year, and just you know, begin to change lives. And you know, again, this is what we're meant to do. In many ways, we're not set up to make these types of differences, but if we continue to talk about it, we continue to make priorities about it, Krishna will send the resources to do it. If he feels that, you know, there is an interest in his devotees to want to do these activities, Krishna will send the resources. Or if he doesn't, there's a reason why he doesn't. It means that he would want us to redirect our energy somewhere else. But it seems very likely that this is, you know, if this is a desire that the devotees have and they really want to do it, they want to dedicate their lives to doing it, it can be humongous impacts that can be made.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. I don't want to take up any more of your time.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Bhakti Brett.
That was a nice question, Dr. Brett, and it reminded me with, I'm sure Dronacarya will remember, it reminded me of my spiritual master when he would say that in America, he didn't mention America, but the countries that speak English, but he was kind of referring to America, where even the English language is nothing but grunts and groans. Remember Dronacarya? Good used to say that, because, you know, it's just grunts and groans without emotion. So yeah, you know, we tend to be, I think, very much deepened in, unfortunately, in the mode of ignorance and the Western far advanced countries, as opposed to the really laid back or, you know, third world countries where people really understand the meaning of community. So thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for such wonderful questions and discussion. Dronacarya, thank you for bringing up points that really stirred up some really nice discussion and questions. And I want to remind devotees to please do not forget to join us this evening for our Bhagavad Gita circle at 6 o'clock. Please do join us this evening. Until then, have a wonderful day. And thank you, Dronacarya. Vantrakapatibhyascha kripasindabevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna, devotees. Have a wonderful day.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everyone.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Parikshit Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare Krishna, Mother Anasuya.
Hare Krishna, Dronacarya Prabhu.
All right. I'll get in touch with you a little bit later. Sorry I've been late getting back to you on some of the things you've
No problem. We'll catch up. I know you've been busy. We'll catch up. Thank you.